Before the world saw images of burning apartment blocks on their screens, before tanks crashed across the border, before missiles carved fire through the night sky, the battlefield in Ukraine was already crowded. Crowded not with soldiers, but with the invisible footprints of nations. The United States, Europe, Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, satellite intelligence agencies, private military contractors, companies, cyber units, all of them were already standing around Ukraine like giants encircling a small valley. Long before the first explosion in Kyiv, a quieter war was shaping the louder one. It was a war of alliances, diplomacy, economic pressure, sanctions, pipelines, energy blackmail, cyber attacks, propaganda, and intelligence networks. The missile strikes that shocked the world in 2022 were just the visible surface. The real conflict had begun decades earlier. This is the story of how Ukraine became the world's most dangerous proxy battlefield. Ukraine declared independence in 1991, a young country searching for its identity. The cracks are widening inside Ukrainian society, torn between Moscow's shadow and Europe's promise. And now, with this history behind us, we step onto the modern battlefield, a battlefield where land, identity, alliances, and technology collide. After independence, Ukraine stood at a crossroads. One road led west toward the European Union, trade, opportunity, democracy, a future aligned with modern European values. The other road led east toward Russia, shared history, shared language, shared culture, and the familiar but fading memories of a Soviet past. For millions of Ukrainians, especially the young, the choice became clearer each year. They wanted Europe. They wanted freedom. They wanted a future where corruption was not a daily reality and where opportunity was not a distant dream. But as Ukraine leaned away, Russia watched with growing alarm. To understand why, we need to step inside Russia's deepest fear, a fear woven from geography, history, and blood. Russia is one of the most exposed nations on Earth. Its western border is a vast open plain, flat and wide, with no protective mountains or seas. This geography is not just a detail, it shaped the psychology of an entire nation. Across these plains came the armies that traumatized generations. Napoleon marched through this corridor in 1812. German forces invaded through it during the First World War. And in the Second World War, Hitler's armies stormed across Ukraine into Soviet territory, unleashing destruction on a scale the world had rarely seen. By the time that war ended, more than 27 million Soviet citizens were dead. Entire cities were erased, families vanished. Russia felt the horror of seeing enemies close enough to threaten its heart. This trauma did not fade with time. It hardened into military doctrine, into national memory, into the Russian worldview. A doctrine was carved into the soul of Russian strategy: never allow the enemy to come close again. For Russia, geography is not abstract. It is destiny, danger, and vulnerability. And right in front of that vulnerable border stands Ukraine. To Russian strategists, Ukraine is not just another neighbor. It is the last shield, the living wall that protects Moscow from the West. If this wall moves westward, if Ukraine aligns fully with Europe or NATO, Russia fears that history will repeat itself, only this time with modern weapons, modern alliances, modern surveillance, and far higher stakes. This is why Russia reacted so fiercely when Ukraine began pivoting toward Europe. Moscow saw not just political change, but the collapse of its final defensive barrier. But geography and history are just the beginning. To understand why Russia sees Ukraine as vital, we have to travel deeper into identity, power, and national mythology. For centuries, Russian leaders have claimed that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, two branches of the same ancient tree. This belief is more than cultural nostalgia. It is a political idea, one that shaped Russia's view of the world for generations. If Ukraine turns fully westward, Russia feels not just strategic loss, but emotional humiliation, as if a brother has chosen another family. When the 2014 revolution toppled a pro-Russian president and Ukraine began moving sharply toward the European Union, the Kremlin was shaken. Ukraine was slipping from its grasp, and the West seemed ready to welcome it. But one event intensified Russian fears like nothing else: NATO expansion. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, a wave of Eastern European nations joined NATO. Poland, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovakia. Then, the shock that shook Moscow, the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, once part of the Soviet Union itself, joined the alliance. Western leaders celebrated these countries' right to choose their future. But in Russia, the view was far darker. Each new NATO member felt like another step in a slow encirclement. Each new base felt like a tightening noose. Each NATO exercise near Russian borders felt like a warning. And then came 2008. At the NATO summit in Bucharest, one statement changed everything. Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. For the West, it was a diplomatic sentence. For Russia, it was a nightmare. If NATO entered Ukraine, Russia would feel surrounded, boxed in, stripped of its security buffer. To Western leaders, NATO was a shield. To Moscow, it was a knife approaching its borders. With each year that passed, Ukraine leaned further toward Europe: trade agreements, military training, political reforms, citizenship aspirations, cultural shifts. Inside Ukraine, a new identity was forming: Ukrainian, European, forward-looking, ready to let go of the past. Inside Russia, the fear deepened. Ukraine was no longer just drifting west, it was running. And so by the time 2022 arrived, the fuse that had burned slowly for decades finally reached the dynamite. Russia's motives were not created overnight. They were built on geography, strengthened by history, fueled by trauma, and amplified by decades of NATO expansion. And that brings us to the heart of the story: why Ukraine matters so much to Russia that it was willing to risk global consequences. We begin with the most fundamental truth: Russia has no natural defenses in the West. Ukraine is the protective barrier that stands between Russia and Europe, the land that historically absorbs the first blow. In the Kremlin's worldview, if Ukraine joins NATO, the shield vanishes. But Ukraine is more than geography. It is also home to Crimea, Russia's warm water naval gateway to the Mediterranean, to the Middle East, to North Africa. Sevastopol is the crown jewel of Russia's navy. Without Crimea, Russia's power at sea shrinks dramatically. Russia also looks at Ukraine through the lens of industrial memory. During Soviet times, eastern Ukraine was the beating heart of heavy industry, the factories that built tanks, ships, aircraft engines, missiles, steel, and machinery. Losing this region was like losing the hands that built the empire. Ukraine's farmland is among the most fertile in the world. Its wheat, corn and sunflower oil feed nations across Africa and the Middle East. Control of these food supplies is a form of global influence, one Russia deeply understands. And as Russia's population declines, Ukraine's Slavic population represents demographic hope, a fact rarely spoken aloud but always present in strategic thinking. But perhaps the deepest wound is emotional. All of these factors, security, history, identity, industry, agriculture, energy, demographics, merge into one truth. From Russia's perspective, Ukraine is not just a neighbor. It is a cornerstone of its worldview, its security, its identity, and its future. To Western governments, NATO was a defensive shield, a guarantee that smaller nations would not be swallowed by larger ones. During the Cold War, Russia had a wide buffer zone of friendly or controlled states. That buffer collapsed in the 1990s. Each choice, though freely made, felt to Russia like another betrayal, another step in a slow, tightening circle. These two realities existed at the same time, and they could not coexist peacefully. As the political storm grew, another transformation was happening quietly beneath the surface. Ukraine was no longer just a country choosing between East and West. It was becoming a strategic prize in a much larger global struggle. By the time the full-scale invasion began, Ukraine had already become a proxy battlefield. The world's major players were involved, some openly, some in the shadows. The United States and the European Union began pouring enormous amounts of military assistance into Ukraine. This wasn't simply charity. It was a geopolitical calculation. If Ukraine fell, the entire security architecture of Europe would shift overnight. The US provided advanced weapons, training programs, long-range missile systems, intelligence support, and financially backed Ukraine's government to prevent collapse. European nations supplied air defense systems, ammunition, humanitarian aid, and political backing. Across the ocean, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, and dozens of others contributed in different ways, each one reinforcing Ukraine's ability to resist. Russia, meanwhile, did not stand alone. Its most controversial partner was Iran, whose cheap but deadly Shahed drones became a defining weapon of the war. Every night, swarms of these kamikaze drones darkened the skies over Ukrainian cities, striking power plants, railways, residential districts, forcing Ukraine to spend vast resources defending against an endless rain of cheap, expendable weapons. China played a more subtle role. It did not send weapons, but it became Russia's economic backbone. While the West cut Russia off from markets, banking systems, and technology, China opened its doors. It bought record-breaking volumes of Russian oil. It sold components, industrial equipment, and technology that Russia could no longer obtain from Europe. China's silent support kept Russia's economy afloat at a moment when Western sanctions were designed to cause collapse. Turkey, a NATO member, played perhaps the most complex role of all. On one hand, Turkey sold Bayraktar TB2 drones to Ukraine, a weapon that became symbolic in the early days of the war for striking Russian convoys and lifting Ukrainian morale. On the other hand, Turkey maintained strong economic ties with Russia, refused to impose sanctions, and positioned itself as a mediator between the two sides. In doing so, Turkey kept both friendships alive, strengthening its own diplomatic power. And then there was India, a country walking one of the most delicate tightropes in recent political history. India did not join Western sanctions. It did not condemn Russia with the same intensity as Europe. Instead, India repeatedly called for peace, dialogue, and a diplomatic end to the conflict. But at the same time, India supplied humanitarian aid to Ukraine and emphasized international law. Economically, India became Russia's lifeline by purchasing massive quantities of Russian oil. India needed affordable energy for its growing population, and Russia needed buyers after being cut off from Europe. Their interests aligned. In this way, India maintained neutrality not as weakness, but as strategic independence. It refused to be pulled into a Western bloc or a Russian bloc, instead protecting its own national interests and global partnerships. With all these players, Western nations, Russia, Iran, China, Turkey, India, intertwined in different ways, Ukraine transformed from a regional conflict into a global arena. And the weapons arriving in Ukraine reflected this internationalization. American HIMARS systems reshaped battlefield logistics. German IRIS-T and Patriot systems shielded cities from missile strikes. British Storm Shadow missiles struck deep into Russian positions. Polish and Czech ammunition flowed across the border by the truckload. The European Union sent billions in aid packages, while the United States provided real-time intelligence from satellites and aircraft. Russia countered not just with its army, but with Wagner, a private mercenary force that fought brutal battle across eastern Ukraine. Wagner fighters were not bound by the same political rules as regular soldiers. They moved in the shadows, forming a parallel force that Moscow could use without official acknowledgement. Ukraine responded with one of the most surprising developments of the war. It became a wartime innovation hub. Ukraine began producing more than 50,000 FPV drones per month, small, agile, explosive-packed devices built in garages, basements, workshops, and underground factories. These drones cost a fraction of traditional weapons, but destroyed Russian tanks, bunkers, and vehicles worth millions. This was the birth of a new kind of warfare: decentralized, improvised, high-tech, fast, and deadly. The flow of intelligence was equally revolutionary. Never in history had a country under attack received such detailed, real-time surveillance from satellite companies. Maxar, Planet Labs, and ICI provided images of Russian troop movements every few minutes, cutting through clouds, darkness, and camouflage. At the same time, OSINT, open-source intelligence communities, played an unexpected role. Analysts using social media videos, satellite images, GPS data, and intercepted communications mapped the war in astonishing detail. Civilians across the world tracked troop movements, confirmed missile launches, identified destroyed vehicles, and exposed propaganda. Information that was once limited to governments was suddenly available to anyone with an internet connection. This transparency changed everything. The war was no longer hidden behind military secrecy. It unfolded live in real time across Twitter, Telegram, YouTube, and satellite feeds. Ukraine was not just fighting Russia, it was fighting in front of the entire world. This global involvement transformed the conflict. Ukrainians and Russians fired the weapons, but nations across the earth supplied them, guided them, funded them, and shaped the outcome. By now, Ukraine was no longer just a country under attack. It had become the center of a worldwide geopolitical storm, a storm that would soon be changed further by the most important shift of all: the rise of technology as the deciding force in modern warfare. As the world watched Ukraine fight for survival, a new kind of battlefield emerged. one that didn't exist in earlier wars. This wasn't just a conflict of tanks and soldiers. It was a conflict watched from space, coordinated through satellites, fought by drones, powered by artificial intelligence, and shaped by the invisible hands of technology. What the world witnessed was the birth of transparent warfare, a war where entire armies could no longer hide from the sky. Next came drones, perhaps the most transformative weapon of the conflict. In the early days, Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2 drones hovered silently above Russian columns, striking convoys, command posts, and anti-air systems. Videos of these strikes became symbols of Ukrainian resistance, shared across social media as proof that Russia's powerful army could be humbled. Russia answered with Lancet drones, loitering munitions designed to hunt artillery, radar systems, and ammunition depots. They circled silently over the battlefield, plunging down on targets with terrifying accuracy. Then Iran entered the stage with its Shahed kamikaze drones. They came not as single weapons, but as swarms, slow, buzzing, relentless machines that flew in clusters toward Ukrainian cities. Their engines echoed like motorcycles in the night sky, a haunting sound that became the soundtrack of fear in Kyiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, and many others. They were cheap, expendable, and deadly. But Ukraine adapted faster than anyone. Garages became drone factories. Basements became workshops. Volunteers, engineers, students, everyone contributed. Ukraine began producing tens of thousands of FPV drones each month. Small, high-speed, first-person view aircraft, guided by soldiers wearing goggles. These drones became flying bullets, slamming into tanks worth millions, destroying bunkers, bridges, and vehicles with a single explosive charge. A war that once relied on tanks now relied on $400 drones. This was the world's first full-scale drone war, a war that future militaries will study for decades. But perhaps the most unexpected weapon of all was not a missile or a drone, it was internet from space. When Russia disabled communication networks across Ukraine, something miraculous happened. Trucks arrived carrying Starlink terminals, small dishes capable of connecting directly to a network of satellites orbiting the Earth. Suddenly, Ukrainian soldiers deep in trenches could live-stream video from drones. Commanders could coordinate in real time. Hospitals remained connected. Rescue workers mapped damaged neighborhoods. Civilians sent messages to loved ones. Starlink became the nervous system of Ukraine's defense, a digital backbone that held the entire communication grid together when everything else collapsed. In some operations, Ukrainian drones only worked because of Starlink. In others, missile strikes were coordinated through this satellite network. Entire brigades moved under its guidance. It was one of the clearest examples in modern history of technology influencing the fate of a nation. While satellites, drones, and digital networks shaped the visible battlefield, another war raged in the shadows, a cyber war fought with code instead of bullets. Russian hackers targeted power plants, banks, government websites, television stations, and transportation systems. They attempted to paralyze Ukraine from the inside by shutting down electricity grids and corrupting critical data. But Ukraine was not alone. Western cyber defense teams worked behind the scenes, protecting systems, tracing attacks, and keeping infrastructure alive. Global tech companies mirrored Ukrainian government databases into secure cloud servers, making it nearly impossible for hackers to erase vital information. And outside official channels, Hacktivist groups launched attacks on Russia, breaking into servers, exposing files, defacing websites, and disabling networks. This cyber battle never made it to the front pages, but it played a crucial role in shaping the momentum of the war. On the physical battlefield, long-range missile systems reshaped the conflict in ways that neither side expected. American HIMARS struck Russian ammunition depots deep behind the lines, forcing Russia to move storage facilities farther away. British and French Storm Shadow missiles hit strategic command posts and fuel centers. Ukrainian Neptune missiles sank the Russian flagship Moskva, shocking the world and crippling Russia's Black Sea dominance. These strikes didn't just damage equipment, they shattered the illusion of invincibility. As months turned into years, trench warfare returned, a haunting echo of the First World War. But these trenches were different. Instead of relying on periscopes and binoculars, soldiers used drones and thermal cameras. Instead of waiting for scouts, they watched live video feeds from above. Maps were digital. Sensors detected movement. AI software predicted artillery paths. Muddy trenches were connected by encrypted satellite links. It was World War I fused with 21st century technology. Brutal, slow, grinding, yet disturbingly modern. Psychological warfare also grew into a powerful weapon. Deepfake videos attempted to spread confusion. Propaganda campaigns spread across Telegram. Images and footage, real and fake, were used to shape public opinion, demoralize troops, and influence global narratives. Every victory was amplified, every defeat reshaped, every message crafted for impact. But behind all these strategies, technologies, and geopolitical maneuvers lies the real story: the people. The human cost of this war is almost too heavy to describe. Entire cities like Mariupol were reduced to skeletons of concrete and steel. Streets once filled with families, children, markets, and laughter became fields of rubble. In some places, not a single building stood untouched. Millions of Ukrainians fled their homes, forming the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. Families were torn apart. Mothers carried their children across borders in freezing temperatures, unsure if they would ever return to their homes. Fathers stayed behind to fight. Grandparents remained in war zones, unable or unwilling to leave the land they lived on for generations. Tens of thousands of children were displaced, traumatized, or separated from their families. Them sleep peacefully again. Civilians faced winters without heat, light, or water. Food supplies fluctuated. Fuel prices soared. Hospitals struggled. Schools closed. Lives were frozen. And it wasn't just Ukraine that suffered. Russian families also lost sons, brothers, husbands, and fathers. Their losses were hidden from public view, but they were real, painful, and permanent. Economies on both sides cracked under strain. Global food chains were disrupted. Energy markets shook. Countries far from the battlefield, in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, felt the shockwaves of rising prices and grain shortages. The scars of war were not drawn on maps. They were drawn on people. And yet, with all this suffering, with all this devastation, one question remains. Why does the war not end? Why does peace remain out of reach? The answer is tragically simple, because neither side can afford the consequences of defeat. Russia will not surrender Crimea, a symbol of power and its most important naval base. Ukraine will not give up its territory or identity, not after so much sacrifice. The West cannot abandon Ukraine without losing credibility and influence. Russia cannot retreat without appearing weak at home and abroad. Europe is exhausted, drained by energy crises, political tension, and economic strain, yet it remains committed to supporting Kyiv. Ukraine is resilient, unbelievably so, yet its resources are limited. The United States continues to help, but election cycles influence the level of support. And China watches from a distance, gaining influence quietly as the conflict drains Western resources and attention. This is why the war continues, not because anyone is winning, but because no one can afford to lose. And so, Chapter 2 closes not with resolution, but with a world struggling to understand what comes next. Ukraine stands strong but scarred. Russia persists but isolated. Europe adapts but strained. The global order trembles. But what the world sees, missiles, drones, trenches, explosions, is only half the story. Because behind the visible conflict lies a hidden one. A war fought in shadows, through energy pipelines, cyber networks, spies, sabotage, grain routes, political alliances, and financial pressure. This is the war the world doesn't see, but the one that decides the future.